We are very pleased to have Vicky here with us today. She was introduced to us through Mike Berners-Lee, who is, of course, one of the few people who's done two exchanges with us. And Vicky works with Mike at Small World Consulting. She has recently completed her PhD, in which she explored ways the advertising industry can pursue climate-related objectives rather than solely consumption-driven goals. And she also has spent 17 years in the UK advertising production and media sector. She played a key role in establishing sector-wide accountability for emissions in advertising, and she is also part of a coalition advocating for the ban of fossil fuel ads in the UK, and recently wrote the briefing for MPs with the foreword by Chris Packham, which I sent to everyone for that July 7th parliamentary debate. And we're so pleased to have Vicky here to lead us in this topic. We definitely want to hear everyone's opinions and their questions, and also your ideas. If you have thoughts on how we can put more pressure on government, or if there's another avenue for possibly bringing about this change, we'd love to hear your ideas and see what we can come up with. So, Vicky, over to you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you for having me here. Um, yeah, I have worked in business and advertising for around about 18 years. I started working in advertising post-production, and many of the UK advertising agencies and production houses were our clients. And then I also did a stint as a business director in a digital marketing agency. So over that period of time, sort of 2015 onwards, I became super familiar with the way the ad industry works. I also, during that time, did a master's in international development. So I really began to look at the way advertising affected the climate crisis and promoted consumption. I would say kind of 2017, 2018, I started to wonder why the advertising and marketing world really wasn't doing very much about addressing the climate crisis. Um, began to speak to the trade bodies. I began to speak to people that I knew within advertising, very senior individuals. And this went on for a while, and then the urgency came to act, came sort of just before and just after COVID. And still, there wasn't really anything significant that I could see that was happening in the advertising world about addressing emissions. And when thinking about emissions for most things, but certainly advertising and marketing, really there were kind of two types of emissions there. The operational emissions from things like energy use and flying and all the things that we're familiar with in film production. And then, of course, the emissions from advertising and its effect on society and that effect on consumption, which has different names, but it's often referred to as advertised emissions. So I'd say really by about 2020, some advertising agencies and trade bodies were addressing operational emissions, but that was it. And despite calls from activist groups and different areas of the ecosystem, there was really no acknowledgement of advertised emissions on this sort of macro level. Um, but also research showed that advertised emissions were much bigger than operational emissions. So there is research on purpose disruptors, which talks about, you know, this can account for up to 1/3 of the average UK's consumer footprint, over and above what might have been consumed had that advert not been created. So whilst we're all trapped in this fossil fueled society, we do, of course, have control over the consumption that we have in the global north and discretionary emissions from that consumption. So this is around frequent flying, meat consumption, fast fashion, buying oversized SUVs, all the things that advertising and marketing promotes. And it's ubiquitous, right? It's on every digital channel, it's in our home, it's in our eye line, it's everywhere we go, we can't get away from it. So thinking about that consumption, 86 to 90% of all the materials that we use now to produce stuff is still from virgin sources. So, you know, we're consuming, extracting, consuming, and dumping stuff. And a lot of that is driven by the persuasiveness of adverts. And what if we could change that and only advertise the really good stuff? And is that happening? Not really. There's other research that shows out of around about 2.5 million adverts analysed globally, around about 4% contain sustainability messaging. So all of this really led to me questioning a bit further, how can the advertising industry, with all its might, all its creative credentials and its power, confront and address the emissions from this persuasion? And just something aside to point out, the UK advertising market is really important to focus on. It's the third largest globally. It has a spend of something like 43 billion this year projected, and it's leading creatively. So it's won more Cannes Lions than any other European country for the past 20 years. So we need to get it right here in the UK. We need to do something in this country. My PhD research looked at this issue really from the perspective of industry insiders, those who are running the show, very senior heads of departments in mainstream agencies. I asked them if they thought there was a problem, and if they did, what they thought the solution might be, and how they might pivot their agencies towards ditching these polluting clients. Essentially, what would it take for that kind of deep institutional change to occur in the face of the climate issue? And what the research uncovered was a very, very concerned and conflicted set of senior individuals who were fully aware of the impact of advertising on the climate crisis. They had worked very hard to try and pivot their agencies away from working with polluting clients, whether that be oil and gas or, airline clients or whatever it is. They found two main barriers to this. It was the global level CEOs who did not want to get rid of any clients despite all these commitments made in annual reports of putting, solar panels on top of the office roofs. And they also highlighted the role of the trade bodies in this country and the fact that they have a mandate to represent everybody from the industry and to represent their concerns back to the industry and back to government. But essentially, they weren't doing that. They wouldn't acknowledge advertised emissions, and they still won't, it would seem. So really, the research looked at this kind of blueprint of delay and denial, which we've seen in other sectors. And even really going as far as the trade bodies claiming that advertised emissions or measuring of them is inaccurate, it can't be done, it won't help the industry to meet net zero. They even go to lengths to say how actually advertising is only effective in 12% of cases. Therefore, it doesn't work. Therefore, there's no need to admit that it has an effect and it doesn't increase consumption. So there is a clear trail through this sort of content and discourse analysis that there is this underlying delay and denialism, which creates a real inertia in the industry. It's at an impasse. What can we do to go on from this point? So tangible efforts do come from this recent petition from Chris Packham, which got 110,000 signatures, just over that, from the public. It got support from hundreds of creative agencies who also signed a ban to stop misleading adverts for oil and gas products. It was debated in Westminster Hall at the beginning of this month of July in 2025, and it went really well. It actually got a lot of support, cross-party support, apart from one Conservative MP. The argument very much closely followed the rationale for a ban on tobacco products and smoking. They also likened it to restrictions for high-fat, salt, sugar foods and gambling. They talked about bans in France on fossil fuels and most recently a ban on fast fashion advertising. They talked about how many cities in the UK and abroad had also banned this on public council space. So huge amounts of support. They talked about how oil and gas adverts stayed just narrowly within the advertising standards guidelines, managed greenwash, but still managing to mislead the public and keep that kind of social license to operate. So unfortunately, at the moment, the government won't change its stance. They won't take it any further. But I think what that showed is the appetite and a real kind of breakthrough moment that some kind of restrictions are inevitable in the UK. It just depends on where or when. So I think to summarize and be positive about it, I think the advertising marketing industry is moving towards accountability. There are some that are still kind of stuck in the 80s and 90s, where they sort of think that they can delay and deny the existence of any detrimental effects of their work. Um, but it's a good opportunity for them to, especially the trade bodies, to do some kind of real critical thinking and risk analysis to make sure that they don't become irrelevant in the climate narrative. And also, of course, there's really great groups like Creators for Climate, got a huge amount of members now, Clean Creators, Work from Purpose Disruptors, lots of other industry groups that are doing brilliant work. So yes, that's a general summary of my work, my journey and my work, but I would very much like to get thoughts from your listeners and what they think, what the solutions might be.